Hi, I'm Paul Nation. I'm an Emeritus Professor at Victoria University of Wellington and have spent most of my academic life training teachers of English as a foreign language. Today I want to talk about the teaching of writing and designing a well-balanced writing course. Whenever we ask the question, how do we teach writing, or how do we teach reading, or how do we teach listening, it's always useful to come back to the principle of the four strands and to look at where writing fits in those four strands. And that's what we're going to do now. The first strand is the strand of meaning-focused input. As far as writing is concerned, meaning-focused input provides opportunity for learners to gather information that they need for their writing. Ideally, writing tasks should be based on things that the learners know a lot about or that they can gather a lot of information about. This makes the writing easier because then learners can concentrate on how they express the language rather than the information that they have to seek to put in the task. The meaning-focused output strand is really the center of a writing course. Half of the meaning-focused output strand should involve writing. The other half involves speaking. There are two major kinds of writing which can occur in the meaning-focused output strand. The first kind of writing could be called careful writing, where the learners write and they think carefully about what they're going to write about, they gather information about it, they might make several drafts, but they write and try to reach the best that they can do in their writing. The other kind of writing involves some kinds of careful writing, but is really writing across a wide range of different kinds of writing. For example, the learner should practice writing emails in English, writing letters in English, writing lists in English, taking notes in English, and doing the large variety of writing that people need to do in their everyday lives. So it's important that a writing course doesn't just focus on one kind of writing, but takes account of the different kinds of writing that people need to do. And we'll come back soon to look at these different kinds of writing. The third strand of a well-balanced writing course includes language-focused learning. And this involves giving deliberate attention to language features. At a very elementary level, spelling rules can be very helpful for learners who have to write. English is a difficult language to spell, but there are rules that work, or they work most of the time anyway, and learners should become familiar with many of these rules. Another activity which is important in the language-focused learning strand involves reading like a writer. Before learners write a particular kind of text, it's very useful if they can see some examples of those kinds of texts. And they look at those examples and analyze them and ask questions about them. What questions is this text answering? And then they can use those questions to guide their own writing. So this is called reading like a writer. So when you read the text, you do it knowing that you are going to have to write a similar text. A third kind of learning, which is important in the language-focused learning strand, is the productive learning of vocabulary and collocations. Learners need vocabulary when they write, and they need to make use of multi-word units or collocations. And it's useful to do some deliberate learning of very useful words and collocations for writing. For example, if learners are going to do academic writing, it's important that they study the academic word list, because the academic word list involves the vocabulary which is very frequent in academic writing. They should also be giving some attention to the technical words of that subject area, so that they can produce them in their writing. A fourth kind of learning, which can occur in the language-focused learning strand, is doing guided writing exercises. And these can include things like filling the blanks, substitution tables, following a model, and so on. And we will look at those in a later video. The fourth strand of a well-balanced writing course includes fluency practice. Learners need to be able to write reasonably quickly. This is particularly important if learners are sitting exams in the English language. Native speakers of English can write much more quickly than non-native speakers. And non-native speakers need some practice so that within the same time they can write much more than they usually write. This can be achieved by doing repeated writing activities. That is, the learners write an answer to a question, and that answer might involve a paragraph or 2 or 3 paragraphs. They measure the time it took them to do the writing. Then they try to do it again, but this time to write more quickly. Repeated writing provides very useful practice for timed examinations. Another kind of writing activity to develop fluency is 10-minute writing. In the 10-minute writing activity, the learners write for exactly 10 minutes, and they can write on any topic that they like, but they try to write as much as they can within that fixed time. When they finish their piece of 10-minute writing, they write down the number of words that they wrote on their graph. Their aim is to make their graph go up, so that each time they do 10-minute writing, they should see the number of words they write increase. The teacher shouldn't mark 10-minute writing, but should just comment on the content of what the learners wrote, whether it was interesting, what they could write more about next time, and so on. A very important part of a writing program is getting feedback on your writing. And this feedback should be given to the careful writing that learners do in the meaning-focused output strand. So we've now looked at the kinds of writing and the kinds of activities that should be in a well-balanced writing course. Let's now look at the types of writing that learners need to do in a writing course, and the kind of work that the teacher might have to do when responding to those pieces of writing. In careful writing, the teacher has to respond with corrective feedback. And in another video, we will look at the kind of feedback that the teacher can give to these kinds of writing. In extensive writing, you can often get other classmates to respond to the writing. This is called peer response. This can cut down the amount of marking and the feedback that the teacher has to give. Or it can be a step in getting feedback where the peers give feedback first and the teacher looks over that feedback and adds any additional feedback that might be necessary. The third kind of writing, guided writing, can be self-corrected in many cases. The most elementary kind of writing is guided writing, and other classmates can easily mark this writing using a model. It's probably better to get a classmate to look at the writing rather than for the learner to mark it themselves, because other people see your errors much better than you do. In 10-minute writing, for fluency development, the teacher just responds to the content, and this can just be a simple comment. The teacher probably shouldn't collect 10-minute writing samples, but should just walk around the class looking over the learner's shoulder after they've finished the writing and giving a brief comment on some of the writing. Now let's look at the kinds of writing that learners might do in a well-balanced language course. You can see that the list is quite a long list. We have taking notes, making lists, writing cell phone texts, emails, chat postings, writing friendly letters, writing formal letters, descriptions, narratives, instructions, persuasive writing to convince others, and writing an academic report. Each kind of writing has its own particular purpose. In the examples I've given one or two purposes for each kind. Notes can be for recording messages. Lists can act as a reminder for shopping or daily tasks that you have to do. Cell phone texts can help you arrange your social and business life. Emails are ways of exchanging information. Chat postings express opinions. Friendly letters maintain social content. They often don't provide a lot of information, but they keep good friendly relationships between the people who are sending them to each other. Formal letters are carried out in order to do business, and there is a very set format for most formal letters, with an address, a date, a salutation at the beginning, and some kind of formal ending to the letter. Descriptions. These often involve reactions to objects or events or scenery. Narratives involve telling stories and describing happenings. Instructions give directions on how to do things. Persuasive writing is to convince others. And academic reports provide information gathered by gathering data and by doing an analysis. So you can see that there are lots of different kinds of writing, and a teacher needs to look at these different kinds and consider which ones are most important for their learners, and make sure that there is an opportunity and repeated opportunities to practice these kinds of writing in a course. Let's now look at how a teacher can give feedback to learners on their careful writing. An easy way to do this is to set up a marking system. But both the teacher and the learners must have some understanding of this marking system. There are two indications in the marking system. In the margin of a piece of writing, the teacher writes a letter of the alphabet. So we can see in the marking system we have the letters A, J, or AGRA, or SP, or V, VF, and these are short forms for grammatical features. So A stands for article usage. The learners need to understand that because they might think that A means that their work is terrific, of A quality level, but actually means that they've made a mistake with the use of countable and uncountable nouns. As well as having a mark in the margin, there should be some kind of mark in the text to show where the error occurs. So the mark in the margin shows the kind of error, and the mark in the text shows where the error occurs. The learner's job is then to try and correct the error. So when the teacher does the marking, the teacher doesn't correct the error, but simply indicates to the learner using the marking system where the error occurs. The learner's job is then to try and look at the error, apply some kind of rule if possible, and make the error correct. Surprisingly, a large proportion of the errors that learners make in their writing are things that they can easily correct themselves. Sometimes their errors result from lack of knowledge and they can't easily make a correction. In those cases, the teacher needs to train the learner in some correction strategies which will help them deal with those errors. We will look at those correction strategies in the video on learning grammar. A marking system makes the teacher's job much easier. It also puts the responsibility onto the learner for correcting the error. It's not a bad idea for careful writing for learners to keep a record of how many errors per 100 words that they make. This means that when the learners finish their piece of writing, they need to count how many words they've written. In my experience, the best way to do this is to get the learners to count up to 50 and then make a stroke after the 50th word. And then they count the next 50 words and make another stroke. The teacher can then quickly check that they've counted the words correctly by seeing if the distance between the strokes in their writing is roughly the same. The teacher does the marking and counts the errors that the learners made. The number of errors divided by the number of words multiplied by 100 over 1 then gives the number of errors per 100 words, and learners can put this on a graph. The goal is to make the number of errors go down in their writing. I have done this with learners over a period of 3 years, and it was remarkable to see how quickly the number of errors reduced in their writing. Once they got to about 3 errors per 100 words, it becomes much more difficult to reduce the number of errors. The number of errors reduces quickly at the beginning because very common errors like subject-verb agreement or the use of articles in front of countable and uncountable nouns, once these grammatical features are known by the learners, this reduces errors in almost every sentence. Once they get down to about 3 errors per 100 words, it's much harder to reduce the errors because the errors are usually errors of collocation or not knowing the correct word used to say something or some kind of very infrequent grammatical point. An error graph can provide a useful motivator for learners, particularly in their careful writing. Let's now look briefly at fluency development in writing, and particularly at 10-minute writing. Here are the steps which are involved in 10-minute writing. Step number 1. Each learner chooses an easy topic that they can easily write about. The learners can all be writing on the same topic, or they can choose a different topic and each learner is writing on the topic of their choice. In the back of my book, What Should Every EFL Teacher Know?, there is a list of 100 easy topics that the teacher could put up on the classroom wall for the learners to choose from. The second step is the teacher saying, "Go," and the learners start to write. The teacher measures the time carefully. Step 3. After 10 minutes, the teacher says stop, and the learners stop their writing. They then count the number of words that they wrote. Step 4. They enter the number of words on a graph. Step 5. The teacher walks around making comments about each learner's piece of writing. This can be done while the learners are filling in their graph and looking at their neighbours' graphs. The teacher's comments are really there to encourage the learners to write more and to feel good about what they've written. The teacher should not point out grammatical errors, because if the teacher focuses on grammatical errors, the learners will slow down in their next piece of writing to try to avoid those errors. There are other parts of the writing course which focus on errors. In the fluency strand, there should not be an error focus, but simply a response to the content of the writing. We've now looked at a range of different kinds of writing. Let's look quickly at 6 important principles and see how they apply to the teaching and learning of writing. The principle of the four strands is the first principle. The principle of the four strands says that writing should occur in the meaning-focused output strand, it should occur in the language-focused learning strand, and it should occur in the fluency development strand. So we need to have careful writing, there needs to be feedback and checking, and there needs to be the development of writing fluency. The second principle is the time-on-task principle. The time-on-task principle simply says, if you want to get good at writing, do more writing. So it's important that about half of the meaning-focused output strand involves writing, and 1/4 of the fluency development strand involves writing. You don't get good at writing by not writing. You get good at writing by doing lots of writing. And so the teacher needs to make sure that there are plenty of opportunity for different types of writing and different kinds of writing within a language course. The third principle is the principle of repetition. Repetition helps learning. A reasonable number of writing activities should involve repeated writing. That is, learners write about a topic, and then a week or two later, they write about the same topic again. The first time that they do the writing, they could use notes and take their time. The second time that they do the same piece of writing, they could just have a few cue words to help them and try to do the writing faster. Repeated writing provides repetition and repeated retrieval, which help language learning. About 1/3 of the activities in a language course should be activities that the learners have already done before and that they're now repeating. The fourth principle is the quality of processing principle. And that means that when learners do writing, they should make retrieval. That is, copying is a useful activity, but very quickly learners should get on to doing writing where they have to think of the words that they will need in their writing and bring them back or retrieve them from their memory. Guided writing is useful, but guided writing helps when learners have to make retrieval when they do the writing. Teachers should make sure that writing tasks are challenging the learners and providing thoughtful processing of what they are doing. The fifth principle is the cost-benefit principle, and this applies particularly to the correction of errors. Teachers should help the learners with very frequent errors first of all, because if you help the learners get rid of very frequent common errors, you quickly improve the quality of their writing. The sixth principle is the principle of autonomy, or the learners taking control of their own work. We can encourage autonomy in a writing course through procedures for self-checking. That is, learners learn how to deal with the errors themselves. They learn how to check for errors and how to correct errors. The strategy of reading like a writer is also a good example of an autonomy principle in action. When learners read like a writer, they look at texts that they want to write and see how those texts are organized and then carry that information into the writing of their own text. So in this way, learners are taking control of their own writing and not relying on the teacher or others to provide them with models. I hope now that you can see that a well-balanced writing course involves different types of writing across the four strands. It involves different kinds of writing relating to the learner's needs, and it also involves a variety of activities so that the learners do plenty of writing during the course.